And this interview is with Sherry Sass. It's July 15th, is that right, Sherry?
Yes.
2010. And we're going to sort of begin by asking Sherry to tell us a bit about how she got involved with the Santa Cruz and Friends of the Santa Cruz, how it got established, and maybe a bit of a narrative about what's happened to it since she first got involved.
Okay. I hope there's a long tape here.
Yes, we've got an hour.
Oh, okay. I'm a fish biologist from the East Coast, and when we came out here, it's just like being in Mars, a whole different ecology and different world, which was very exciting. I really loved it, but it was a lot to learn, and we looked for a place to live with a 2-year-old. My husband's job was in Green Valley, which is age restricted, so we really couldn't live there, so we looked around down further south, and when we lived in Green Valley, we would run along the river, the Santa Cruz River, which was a dry wash up there, along the pecan groves. And it was very interesting, and just the ecology of it was a real revelation to me. But then when we started looking down here, we found this flowing river, which was a shock at that point. And it looked like New Hampshire. There were big trees, and there was shade, and there were no prickles, and it was wonderful. And there were fish. Of course, they were tiny, but they were fish. So when we moved down here, I started asking around because I thought, my God, what a resource. There must be some group that there must be some protection for it, and there really wasn't. And the more I looked into it, and this is while I had started at the U.A. in a graduate program, the more I found out that it existed because of benign neglect. At that point, there was a pretty sleepy community. There wasn't a lot of development. It was mostly rural agricultural, with this little development in Tubac being an exception. And so there wasn't a lot of demand for riverside land or water, except for what was already being used. So there are two things happening. I guess one was part of the course I took with Helen Ingram. We had to do
It was a project.
And I asked her if I could do the project of starting a group to protect this incredible resource. And she was very encouraging and gave us seed money to start it. And I actually found U of A was good in two ways. One was you, and the other was when I did a little research, I'd found that, I can't remember, it was a couple of years before, there had been a U of A group with Kate Dixon, I think was her name. She set up this celebration of the Santa Cruz, all along, had different little events. One must have been winter or spring or something. And she got people in each community to come out and celebrate the river, and talked about its history a bit, and had a mailing list from that time, or a sign-up list. And that's how I found the people to start the Friends of the River with. So the U of A was really, in both ways, real instrumental in starting this little group. So. And we actually started it around the issue of the time, because, as I said, there wasn't a lot of pressure at that point to build into the floodplain or take up more water than was already being used. But the water quality was a big issue. There were raw sewage flows coming from the Nogales Wash into the river, and there was and again, it's individuals. There was a kind of a new guy who was the head of the public health in the county, in Santa Cruz County at that time. Patrick, I can't remember his last name. Patrick might have been his last name. Anyway, he was appalled at these raw sewage flows, which have been going on for decades, but everyone was kind of used to it. Oh, it's on the border, Phoenix didn't care, but he did, and he made a big stink about it. He got into the New York Times. I mean, it became a big deal. And so with that wave of recognition of the problem, our group, which we were just starting, latched onto that and said, well, okay, this is going to be our organizing issue. is water quality. So, we kind of built up our membership a little bit, and I applied for some grants, and we did get one with the Department of Environmental Quality. I think it was an EPA grant, but I really can't remember. But anyway, it was the Department of Environmental Quality helped us set up a volunteer monitoring program. That was 1992. So that's kind of how we started Riverwatch and how we launched the organization. Fast forwarding a couple of decades. I was president when I started. I got out of it a bunch of years now back as president. But a lot of it's not the same people from the very beginning. We've pretty much lost all of them but me, the founders. But people that came on soon after, we still have some. One of which is a hydrologist, Ben Lomley, and he's been really a great resource. We kind of are still science-based. That's sort of always been our, I don't know how that worked out. It's just the people that were interested.
Okay.
They generally tended to be some kind of biologist or scientist or something.
Do you want to say something about your sort of story of frustration and success, and how you sort of mix the positive and the negative as you think about this story? Is it a positive story? Is it a...
To my out-of-town friends and relatives, I whine about, I'd like someone else to take over. I feel like it's time for new blood and new enthusiasm and getting more people involved, especially from the South County. And so it's frustrating in that it hasn't. Our membership is kind of a shambles. We don't even ask people to renew regularly, which is, organizationally, we're pretty much a mess. But on the other hand, like I was saying before, in what we actually accomplish and the people that are involved, the very few but wonderful people that are involved, we get a lot done for a real small group. And I've given up trying to get people to do things they don't want to do,
right,
or myself either. So we just go as we do go, and where people's interests lie, that's where we go, and where their energies lie. And so it's an organic group very much, and it relies on individuals very much, both in and out of the group. Our partnerships also are all based on who individuals get along with, and where there's that spark of assistance and common interest and care about something. So on the whole, I think it's been really positive.
You were telling me a little bit earlier about the success you've had in getting tertiary treatment in the International Waste Treatment Plant, and how that came about through your River Watch. Why don't you tell about that?
Well, so we started Riverwatch with the Department of Environmental Quality training us in 1992, and every month since then, more or less, we've missed a few months, but we've sampled the river in 4 or 5 sites where there's been water to sample. And we've expanded it some over the years. We now do quarterly medals and nutrients. And this big database of water quality history has been building. And in the mid-90s, I guess, it started becoming evident that the treatment plant was not adequate to treat the sewage to this surface flow that not only did a really rare environment depend on, a real rare ecology of fish, native fish, but also people's public health were involved. I mean, everybody came to the river to wade and picnic and mess around in the water. My daughter pretty much grew up in this river, this effluent-dominated river. So the water quality issues really came to a head, especially after we documented, and so did the the USGS, that there was this federally endangered Gila top minnow living in the river.
What is that? How do you spell that kind of minnow?
Gila, Gila, top minnow.
Okay,
yeah.
That's going to help the transcribers.
Yeah. And,
okay, thanks.
Sure. And there's only 14 places in the universe that this fish is found, and we're one of them. So that started to build a case, because what was happening was that there was a process, a huge excruciating public process to come up with how to improve the treatment plant and the IOI, the International Outfall Interceptor pipe, the big pipe that comes underneath the Nogales Wash to the treatment plant, bringing Mexican sewage, as well as the city of Nogales, Arizona sewage, and then also Rio Rico. And that all goes to the treatment plant. And that was leaking, and it was past capacity, and it was under huge pressure, and it would be popping, and really ripe for disaster. So this big process was going on. Millions were going into this, and nothing basically was happening. It was a big process, so we were patient to a point. But after like 4 or 5 years of this, and really we were no closer to a solution than we were when we started, that was when this suit came up. This, I believe it was Sierra Club and the Center for Science in the Public Interest.
Okay.
And Teresa Leal was one of the I don't know what you call that, the litigants, I guess.
Yeah.
And they actually asked us to come on board too, and we talked about it a lot on our board with Friends of the River. We decided not to because we felt that we wanted to continue working. There was this process, and we were really, it looked like there was like a bottleneck of a problem between the city of Nogales and the EPA, I guess. And that was kind of the choke point at that point. So we were feeling that if we just went with the suit, then there wouldn't be anybody to push the process along that was actually continuing.
You're talking about a process of collaboration and
right.
sort of negotiation and discussion.
Right.
A discursive process.
Right. Okay. Rather than
this would sort of bring that to a halt, maybe.
Well, it was hard to say if it was at a halt or not. That's what was so difficult. And the suit was going on anyway, so we knew that was happening. So it wouldn't have added that much for us to enter it, and we were a little worried that it might hurt the process that was still sort of ongoing. So I'm not sure if it was the right decision or not, but that's what we decided. So there was I think the suit did come to court, and there was a requirement that the IBWC, who ran the treatment plant with the city of Nogales, which was one of the big issues. How do you have an international agency and a little tiny city that's barely functional partner on running a treatment plant? It was a nightmare for everybody. But anyway, somehow that logjam was pushed through, and this big money, it was $59 million from the EPA, came through. City of Nogales put $2 million into it. And I think there might have been some hundreds of thousands kicked in by Rio Rico. And I don't believe Mexico put any money into it. I'm not sure. I don't think so. So that money went into upgrading the plant so that it would take the nitrogen out of the waste stream. That was the big thing. That was the nitrogen was causing, it was really high ammonia levels, which is absolutely toxic to aquatic wildlife. And also created this sealing layer under the river. That's what it looks like was going on, so that the water was not percolating into wasn't refilling the aquifer. So we got a tree die-off in early 2000s, or mid-2000s, and which was fairly conclusively determined to be partly caused by this sealing layer.
So there were two things, both the tree dry-off and this endangered minnow.
I'm not sure that the tree die-off contributed to but it was certainly something that concerned the community. But I think it was the fish that really pulled that money down more than anything. The fish in the suit. And our river watch data that showed that these high ammonia levels were persistent and were most likely knocking off the fish, because we also did fish surveys periodically. They were very irregular, but we had really good documentation in the late 90s of 4 species of native fish in the river, including the Gila top minnow. And then we did a survey in I can't remember when. There were no fish in the river, basically. This was after the money came through, but before the treatment plant. Oh, no, it wasn't. I take it back. It was before the money came through. Right. No Gila top minnow, basically no fish. Which was a foregone conclusion given the water quality. So when the treatment plant finally got online, which was last spring, 2009, I think officially it was June, the fish came back, which was just astounding. And that was in the midst of, there was still a drought, there was still, there wasn't any additional water being brought in to the basin, but because somewhere those dace, there were longfin dace, and I think there was also mosquito fish, which are not native, but somehow they persisted in however they did it, enough of them to breed and then have an actual appreciable population that we could measure. In 2009 was our last fish survey, and 2008 as well we found fish. So it was a real huge success story. No, excuse me, 2009 was when we found the fish.
It was a big success story.
It was really exciting, and as they say, you couldn't have done it. It wasn't just us, but I think it also wasn't just the suit, or it wasn't just the fish. It was kind of
all these things together, right?
Prodding these huge lumbering agencies to get something done.
You know, it's kind of interesting, and we're going to talk mostly about networks and friends, but lots of narratives have the opposition or the other side, or the dark figure, the thing that's running against you. And I'm not sure there's so much opposition along the border as it is just complacency, or people not.
And dysfunction. There's a lot of dysfunction.
Talk a little about the dysfunction.
Well, I think it's very unfortunate that a little city like Nogales, Arizona, is on the border, because they're so overwhelmed by border issues, at least in my opinion, that whatever internal problems they had that may have been true even if they were, 100 miles from the border, are just compounded because they've got all these overwhelming issues, environmental and political and financial, that they really have not only no control over, but not the expertise or the staff to deal with. They can barely deal with their own little local stuff. So, they're in the midst of this watershed. Nogales never should have been built where it's built. It's built in the bottom of the Nogales watershed. It's a terrible place to build a community, but there it is. They just did the floodplain maps over, and I think something like either 1/3 or 2/3 of Nogales, Arizona, is in the floodplain. Which, you can tell if you look at it, but there's a situation. So it's got a lot of baggage, and it's really ill-equipped to deal with it. And it's that I know they talk about that. What do you call that? That asymmetry of small, and that's in conflicts. Right. But I think that's still true here. Because the city of Nogales, partnering with the IBWC, International Boundary and Water Commission, on this treatment plant is a system set up to fit it all, I think. And actually now, the city finally capitulated, which I think was a good move for them, and they said, you run the plant. IBWC run the plant. That's what they do. That's one of their major occupations, and they're good at it. So I think it's better for everyone. So that's what's happening now.
It's kind of interesting, though. This is an international waste treatment plant, and I don't think there's that many of them. Maybe it's the only one.
I think there's one or two other ones. I think there's one in...
there may be one in San Diego?
I think there is one, yeah.
But water obviously flows across the border, so you either have two waste treatment plants,
which is what Nogales, Arizona wanted. But they didn't get it. But when we get the treated water, we have a benefit, and it's paid for, it's subsidized by our federal government, because the Mexican side always argues, which is how they work it, that they would never treat to the level that is getting treated now, or even before. And so the difference between what they would pay for treatment and what we're paying for their treatment, we pay for.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about a bit is the kind of networks that exist among people that are not necessarily members of Friends of the Santa Cruz. And we talked earlier a little bit about the Sonoran Institute. Do you want to talk a bit about what your connection to the Sonoran Institute is? When we talked to Luther Probst, we talked about the Santa Cruz as being one of his big successes. How did that organization get involved with you?
It was really mostly Amy McCoy, who worked for the Sonoran Institute at that time, and she became part of our board of directors, and she eventually, although she started working down here before this, but she eventually got an EPA grant, a big 3-year, multi-$1,000, even maybe $1 million grant to help community conservation of the Santa Cruz. And it was a real multi-pronged approach. So, for example, here's an example. One thing that we did that I'd wanted to see for a long time was a vegetation survey of the riparian zone. Where is the riparian plants? What's the extent of it? What's the condition? We needed to map it because when this tree die-off happened, we flew up in a little plane. Oh, that's one of the nonprofits that helped us is White Hawk, which is a fabulous little group, another little nonprofit. But what they do is they gather volunteer pilots that have their own planes, and all they get is a reimbursement of their gas, I think. And they will take up different environmental groups to do stuff like at least get an idea of, okay, where are the trees dying? Well, we could see this from the highway otherwise, or, it was on private property. We didn't get permission to get on there, so we could see overhead, and that was really very instrumental. So White Hawk was a great little group, and a number of times, Sonoran Institute, Tucson Audubon Society, we've used them, and a lot of groups along the border have used them. So back to Sonoran Institute. So we needed a vegetation survey to have an idea of where we were talking about, where we really wanted to protect as priorities. So Amy and I and Mary Dahl she's the county community development director, got together and agreed to apply for a grant for the county to get this vegetation mapping done. And I wrote it with Amy, and Mary helped, and we got it. And so and Sonoran Institute did a lot of the work with us as volunteers, ground truthing. University of Arizona helped too. They did a lot of the remote sensing stuff, and the county participated. They gave their, what GIS stuff they had, and it was a great project. And we have this wonderful set of maps now of where the riparian vegetation is, what condition it's in, what kind of subcategories of vegetation we have. So that's just one example of what came out of this grant work. Another was getting major landowners together to kind of brainstorm about how they saw the river, what they wanted to see on their riparian lands, how they could be helped by whatever kind of help they thought they would need to help conserve their lands. That was, I think, less successful, and I was actually kind of discouraging about that process just because I'd been through it a couple times before down here, and it didn't go anywhere. Really.
You think that's because of an idea of private property?
Yeah, partly. It's a privately owned river, except now for the national park, which was another great little story.
Yeah,
on the
tell
river.
about that. That would be good.
Okay, so the river was all privately owned when I got here, except maybe must have been a little right-of-way for a couple bridges. That was pretty much it. And the county owned a little, maybe half an acre into that. The national park in Tumacacori was, I believe, something like 9 acres. I mean, just the buildings. And when development started heating up in the area, it became obvious that Tumacacori is going to become like the Alamo. It was going to be surrounded by development if nothing was done. Mm-hmm. And there's another individual, Ann Razor, was the superintendent at that time.
R-A-Z-E-R?
R-A-S-O-R.
Good.
And she was one of those people that she had a vision, and she was on our board of directors also, and she saw what needed to be done, and damn if she wasn't going to do it. And she just cut through just hordes of, I can't even imagine how much red tape, but she got the Congress to actually expand the boundaries of the park. That was the first step. And then she had to go to see if the landowners would be willing to negotiate selling land to the national park within that new boundary. And the boundary included the river. And after many negotiations and many people screaming how they were never going to split their land and blah, 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 they did. And everybody came away happy, I think. And the river, about a mile of it now, is owned by the national park. So that is the first federal presence we have on the river, and that's a tremendous, tremendous achievement by Anne and by the national park, and also a great boon to river conservation. And there's also another past board member, Tony Sedgwick, has created a little nonprofit called the Santa Fe Ranch Foundation, close to the border east of Nogales. His father was a rancher, Cabot Sedgwick, and when his father died, he's a great guy. So he really was.
Cabot Sedgwick.
Yep, Cabot. Yep. So he established Tony in Cabot's name, established this foundation for river conservation, I think environmental and ranching education, and economic development, local economic development. I think those are the three things the foundation was set up for. And Tony really has a vision also, and he wants to see riparian lands kind of put together. Almost one thing he'd like to see is sort of a grazing bank. I know they do it's called something, grass banking, like the Malpai group does, to help area ranchers in case of long-term drought, and also help the river keep the floodplain lands out of development, and assist with river conservation. So he's sort of coming up from the south end as much as he can, and there are another Sonoran Institute initiative which kind of got in limbo now because of the stop in economic development, but is a CSO, a community stewardship organization that Amy started up with a local developer who's got floodplain lands, one in a development that already exists and that he kind of wouldn't mind having someone else manage it, and another development along the river further south that hasn't been developed yet but also has floodplain lands. And the idea would be to set up this, we called it Foscarito because we couldn't think of a name. Friends of the River has always had a problem with, we don't want to take on actual land because we're not strong enough as an organization. We don't really have the fiscal or legal or long-term stability to say, okay, we can defend this land if someone encroaches on it. So this would be an offshoot of FOSCA that could do that would have a paid staff and a dedicated source of funding from the sale of this development, of this new development. So as house sales would come in, or as people would sell the houses that they bought, a portion of that would go to keep this organization going. And it could link with other developments along the river as they voluntarily wanted to do this. It would give them an easy way to manage their floodplain lands. They could get rid of that liability, the developer. It would give the new residents an assurance that the floodplain lands would be managed for conservation, be a real amenity for them. So anyway, it looked like a really good structure for that purpose. But then the development pressure went away, and everything's just real quiet now. But I think when it comes back, that's going to be an offshoot. And that's all from, the Sonoran Institute and our involvement, and this developer wanted to work with local people like us, and also knew Amy because she's down here so much. So it really, a lot of the issue with private land ownership has to do with people being suspicious of outsiders. I mean, that's a real thing in Santa Cruz County, as I'm sure it is in a lot of small towns where Tucson comes down and tells them to do stuff, and they really bristle. And we've been here long enough, and we've been, I think, benign enough. I think we used to be seen as like some crazy-eyed environmental group just because they didn't know us. But really, we've been here for so long and had enough contact with the local people that I think the other local people, we're local people, that's kind of gone away, and we're kind of trusted now more.
Right.
So anyway, this developer was happy to work with us, and Sonoran Institute with Amy's connection, he was okay with them too. And anyway, and they brought in expertise like a lawyer that specializes in the setting up of this, just exactly this kind of thing, which is way beyond our expertise. We could never do that.
Right.
But Sonoran Institute had some money, and they knew this lawyer, and they brought him in from, I don't know, Colorado or somewhere.
Right.
So anyway.
I want to follow up on this notion of trust here, because clearly networks depend upon trust, which take a long sort of time to build. Are there particular, then you're suggesting there may be particular trust problems where you're dealing with a small town, which is a different town, a different kind of a town, in a fairly remote location, with a lot of big presences around it, which include Mexico, the
Pima
state,
County, Tucson.
Right. And in that sense, this story is not so different from the story in Aho, really, where there's all these guerrillas around, and this sense of being up against it a little bit in terms of the town. So in order to take action with their cooperation, it takes familiarity, you think?
Yes, absolutely.
And sort of, you have to prove yourself over a considerable period of time.
There's the ranchers in this area, I think at first, and that was one of those first processes I went through. It was with the state parks, and this must have been in the mid-90s maybe, where the state parks came down and did this visioning thing about the river. And oh my goodness, the suspicion was huge about, they're not going to take my land type stuff. And the guy that ran that, Roy Ross, was a developer and a rancher, and he bristled as much as anybody, but he was on our board of directors too, damn it. And over time, I think he was still, he's a crotchety guy, but he's got some land along the river just north of the national park, their expanded boundaries. He was one of the ones that said, "Over my dead body, will you split my land?" And then he did.
Yeah.
So, but he is now, and I think he always was. He cared for that land. He doesn't want to see it with a zillion houses on it. But he wants to be the one to call the shots, and now he's much more protective of that land, and he's on the Groundwater Users Advisory Council with me for the Santa Cruz Active Management Area, and I think over time he's really come to see the value of protecting our water levels, protecting riparian areas, not just for their own sake, but for the good of the economic growth that's possible around it, because of how gorgeous that stuff is, how attractive it is. It brings in commerce. So it's partly, I think, familiarity, and partly seeing the economic arguments maybe that have changed.
Okay.
This really used to be a lot more rural than it is now. And it's not everyone that feels like that, but most of the ranchers around here now are at least to some level of degree developers or incipient developers.
And are they also then incipient environmental, or at least interested in sustainability of the water resource, you think?
Yeah. Sustainability of the water resource, because they're water rights holders. They see protection of their water rights is very important.
Okay. Now, when you mentioned the active management area and the establishment of this national park, which includes a mile of the river and a big increase in the amount of land that the national park includes now, one of the questions we're interested in is the relative importance of people and institutions. Clearly these institutions are a victory, and clearly I think the upgrade of the International Waste Treatment Plant was a victory. But do you think, if we were to talk about the relative influence of institutions and people, in your experience, where would you put the emphasis here? What's more important, or are they both important?
I think in just from my experience, I don't know. In particular, the framework of institutions is really important.
Okay.
That we have an EPA, that we have endangered species, that was critical for, things to improve along the river. There was no way we'd get $60 million down here otherwise. The national park, that the national park can do things like expand the boundary and buy land is critical. But if it wasn't for Ann Razor, that would not have happened. If it wasn't for, in the EPA, there were individuals that really felt strongly about that the Santa Cruz deserved that kind of resource allocation. Because there were a lot of people in EPA that didn't, and in other political realms that were feeling like, we're little, what about the Colorado? What about, the big fish, figuratively speaking. So I think without both of those things, I think without the framework it doesn't work, but without those individuals, can I tell you a Hans Huth story?
Sure, absolutely.
This is a Department of Environmental Quality. He's a hydrologist or an environmental chemist, I'm not sure which, or both. He's just a real brain. But he is also a very impassioned environmentalist. And he works on the border team of the DEQ, and he is the most unbelievably cross-border bouncing, effective, totally bilingual guy. He grew up in Argentina, so he's completely fluent, although he sounds like he's from, Arkansas or something. But he... for example, he's found, he's helped us with Riverwatch enormously. We were going to lose our funding from DEQ because DEQ has been eviscerated like all the other state agencies, and they'd been paying for our quarterly lab analysis of our Riverwatch samples. And without that, we really have not a whole lot.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we have some meters and things that we can take dissolved oxygen and stuff, but that's really important stuff, metals and nutrients. So Hans intervened for us and got the USGS, and again, here's a framework. There's this transboundary aquifer assessment project that's been going on that the USGS and the University of Arizona are partnering on with Mexican institutions, and there's some money there. And Prescott Vandervoot, who's a local guy who I know from when he was Beanie and we played soccer together, is helping run that program through the University of Arizona. And Hans talked with Prescott and people in the transboundary place and talked them into saying, this is important for the transboundary assessment. Right. So will you pay for the next year? And they said yes. So they're paying for our next. So I mean, how amazing is that?
Well, it's also clearly all networks.
Yes, but without the structure of the agencies, the money wouldn't be there, the expertise wouldn't be there. Right. But man, those people were absolutely critical. And I mean, Hans is he's like a real Superman, but he's one of those people that they're just like magic. There's been a persistent spike. That's from one of the a series of Riverwatch samples have shown spikes in cadmium. Uh-huh. And Hans has pinpointed it from coming across the border. And that's not an easy task. And then he's pinpointing it on the other side from certain flows where he's pretty sure which industries are putting these spikes in. And but it's a very delicate political dance because he's just a mid-level guy. Mexico's very you can't. Nobody in the U.S. side wants to put off any of the Mexican officials that they have some kind of relationship with. Relationship is huge over there. I think even more so than here. So Hans has been doing this delicate dance to encourage the Mexican authorities to get these mostly they're mom and pop places that supply maquiladoras to clean up their act. And there's money, EPA money and border money to help them do it. So it's not, I think the knee-jerk reaction of the Mexican authorities is, oh my God, it's going to lose jobs. We're not doing it. And so that's where this trust issue and this relationship issue comes in of saying this is not a punitive thing. We're not trying to get anybody to go out of business. we're just trying to help get this technology online so that they can be clean and they're not polluting your water supply as well, So it's happening. So Han was right at the edge of getting completely frustrated and feeling like dire measures had to happen to have this pollution stop. But now it looks like the wheels are creakingly starting, and he just sent a real encouraging email. And so these things are happening so slowly sometimes, but those networks
commitment
exist.
is really important.
Yeah.
And persistence appears to be really important. And maybe empathy with, or at least an ability to understand where other people are coming from. What would you?
Yes.
Right.
Look for get aligned interests. I think that's huge.
Right.
Because it's going to be much harder, and I don't even know if it's right to bring, my little feeling of fuzzy bunnies and fish across the line to people that are dealing with, is their water clean to drink? I mean, it's a different world, and that's not my place to do that, and I don't think that would be right. As Hans wouldn't either, I don't think. But aligning interests is very possible, and if people can expand their understanding to see where their interests really do lie long term, maybe it's even a measure of just stretching your time horizon a little.
Okay, so you think seeing in the long term?
Yeah, I think maybe that's just to think that it's not a luxury. It's a requirement if we are going to continue to live down here. All of us.
Maybe a vision. Vision is such a.
That's a little squishy and maybe a little too spiritual.
Maybe it's an aspiration. A hope that things could be changed, a commitment to change.
Or even a feeling that this will help me, this will help my community, this will help, my people.
Okay.
I can see where it will help. And maybe your idea of help needs to change a little bit, but also having that someone else reach out to you and say, this will help you and the people that you live with and that you love, as well as helping us downstream. I don't think it's enough to say you're helping us.
Yeah.
It's just not enough. So,
but you have to have enough understanding of where other people are coming from to figure out how to appeal to their interests.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and make it easy for them. I think it is really a huge resource to have money.
Okay.
People don't have money. If you have money, you can slick things along, and then people maybe will take a chance and try something.
Right.
Because that's also inertia is enormous of any kind.
Let's talk a little bit about the frustrations, and it seems to me it's fair to say from what we've been talking about so far is that the sort of absence or the size of the organization and the paucity of numbers of committed people doing this. That's always a kind of a problem. There's not enough people and too much work.
Yeah. And it's actually, talking about aligning interests, I have wanted for years to expand not only our membership, but our participation on the board in the South County. And it's just been, it's difficult to get anyone to come on the board because it's extra work. It's something you really have to be passionate about to even consider. And most of the people that are like that are already up to their eyeballs in other commitments. But I think it's a cultural thing too. I mean, in Rio Rico, which is the main large population except for Nogales, it's families. They're working families, and their concerns are their families and their community, their immediate community, and the spare time they have at the end of the day on weekends. And it's not.
You only have one?
It's just really hard to pull these people out, even to participate as in workshops or whatever kind of events we've had over the years, not to mention getting someone to come on the board.
Right. Well, it goes without saying that these are not rich communities, although,
Right, and they're working communities too.
Right.
So it's really, drawing more from the retired people, and that means more from the generally wealthier, generally more Anglo, more North County people, and even out of the county. We have had a lot of people from Tucson on our board, now not so much. But it really, I think it's important for it to continue to be a local organization, and it's just always been a struggle to try and keep it that way, and have people on the board that both are committed to this, if you want to call it a vision, or how people see their own interests, and have them include the ecology of the river as a real basic interest. It's not everyone that sees life that way.
I want to be sure I cover all the things that we want to talk about. We've talked about non-human species, haven't we? We've talked about a couple of things. Well, actually, we've done a pretty decent job about.
Oh, can I talk about more networking?
Yeah, please do.
Just to list a few more.
That's right. That's what would help me a lot.
Great local partnerships with another little, very parallel kind of group to ours called the Anza Trail Coalition.
Okay.
That group was started by an Australian, of all things, who actually just died late last year, Richard Williams.
Okay.
And he, not single-handedly, but almost, started this little group to make a public trail through what was then all private land along the river on the historic Juan Bautista de Anza route to found San Francisco from down in Sonora, and Anza was the commandant in Tubac, so a lot of local history here. So he got this trail on the ground and has been expanding it, and actually there's the county has picked up on this and wants to see the trail run right through Santa Cruz County by 2012, and I think it's going to happen. And because Mary Dahl now, there's another individual within the county, she's the community director, she has taken this on. And if she hadn't taken it on, I don't think it would have happened. And if Richard hadn't been here, it wouldn't have happened. So we've partnered with them a ton on, we help them clean the trail, they help us clean the river, we've helped them buy some equipment, they've loaned their equipment very generously. Cleanups have been a wonderful community event with the Boy Scouts, Tucson Clean and Beautiful, Girl Scouts, Brownies, everybody. At least for cleanups, we can get a lot of community support for that. And now with Riverwatch, we're connected with the Santa Fe Ranch Foundation because they have a little wetland that's part of the Sedgwick's property that now Tony wants to make into an environmental and historical education site, and so we're expanding Riverwatch to test the water in that little wetland. So there's just all these wonderful, teeny partnerships that make a web. They do make a network. Okay. And in doing those things, you meet, I've met all these fantastic high school kids that I can only hope some of them will stick around or come back after college because they're just fabulous and they'll make this place.
So in some sense, the biggest problem, which is a lack of resources, is mitigated somewhat by these interconnections.
Absolutely.
Which give you access to talent and material that you otherwise wouldn't have, and that you can share that. And how do those connections form, Sherry? How do people get to know each other in this way? Could you give me an example of that? How did you get to know the trail people, for instance? Or how did the organization? Did they
just
join
go to
your
meetings.
board?
You go to
meetings.
Yeah, you go to meetings. You go to events. They go to meetings of ours. They come to events of ours. I don't know. I've gotten some people on our board I've seen an article in the newspaper. Mary Helen Maley, one of our founders, was a lawyer at the time. She was a city lawyer, and she wrote an article in the Nogales International that I found wonderful. I can't remember. It was something environmental, and I called her, and she helped start Friends of the River. So weird things. I don't know. People know people.
Have there been connections made by this Riverwatch thing? Are there experiences people have in collecting these samples that They get to know one another. We found in other places that people who work together in the field often begin to share things they otherwise wouldn't.
I'm trying to think. Certainly, the Riverwatch people have gotten friends with each other, and people have come along from different agencies, and grad students and high school students have come along with. Yeah, weird things have happened that we connected, like maybe some agency or university people with each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Riverwatch, weird stuff like that.
Yeah.
I can't think, but probably along the way, yes, new connections are formed that go on and make other connections.
And a lot of you do share membership on boards. There's an overlapping membership.
Not on boards, at least not from our board to other boards except for GUAC. No, that's not true. Heritage Foundation. One of our board members is on the Santa Cruz Heritage Alliance board. So yeah, I guess we do have. That's and Ben Lomley has served on the advisory council for the IBWC. So yeah, that's true. That does happen.
And you said you were on the
groundwater
board of the groundwater management.
The groundwater users advisory council. Yeah.
So it was all coming out kind of in one line. And I thought it was that.
Good.
It said a car accident, so I assumed it was
All right.
Yeah, now that you put it like that, it does. I see little tendrils, kind of, and they're irregular. They're very irregular because it really depends on, like, the Rotary. I did a few talks at the Rotary, and at the time we were really involved with, Diane Austin, with the Bureau of Applied Anthropology at the U of A, with this composting toilet project that she had going in Sonora, and we were getting a lot of community participation and donations for that project. And what we would do is we'd double them. Any donation we would get in, we'd double and then send it along to that project. And we really got several $1,000s toward that project, and it was really going great.
But this was the composting toilets were both a water quality concern and a quantity?
Yes.
So you were interested in both reducing the waste flow into the river and the use of water?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. And it was also a public health issue, which, really talk about aligning interests. That worked out great. And the university women got interested in this project as well, and that was a woman that belonged to them and got interested in our group, and she brought them along. But then that was one of those things where the tendrils started forming, and then all the stuff on the border happened, and a field trip that we had planned to go over there, we had to cancel it because people were being shot at the border, and we thought it would be prudent not to go over there, and so that's kind of gone on hiatus now. And the Rotary connection, it's my fault because I didn't pursue it, but there wasn't someone in any of those Rotary connections I made that said, this is great, let's do this, to continue this. And that's sort of what you need, is someone on the other side saying, I'll pick this up.
Right, exactly. I've got two questions here that I want to follow up on. One of it has to do with the overlapping ideas of environment and sustainability and public health, because I think these are two areas that come together very much, but they're not necessarily always comfortable kind of allies. And the other idea, let's talk about that, and then the other will come back to me. I was trying to lay them out so I wouldn't forget them, and in the course of talking about one, I forgot the other. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So it's community, public health,
and the sort of environment.
Environment, okay.
Yeah, the environment and public health things, which may not always fit together, and how that's kind of worked here on the Santa Cruz.
I think it's worked really well here because this is our water supply. I mean, it's not exactly the surface water, but that's the aquifer, and it's very flashy. It's not like, I'm sure the water gets filtered from the effluent, but it's not unconnected, and we don't know how much filtering goes on, and we don't know what stuff is not only from the effluent, but from whatever flushes down the Nogales Wash from all this urban drainage.
So what's good for the fish, it's not that hard to connect with what's good for the people.
Right. And on the other side, it's obvious to them. I mean,
Public health is sort of the big environmental issue.
And water is, if you don't have a reliable water supply, it's the questionable quality, and it's expensive. I mean, people paying for water just to drink and wash with is horrendous. So when you can avoid having to flush with water, what a boon to your community. You can, at least if there's a limited supply, you can use it for stuff you really need it for.
Right.
So that, I think a lot of times in this area it aligns great. I think sometimes in the past there have been people that say, well, if we need more water, just cut down the trees. Of course, they drink a lot, which they do. And that's tricky. I mean, you can make arguments about the trees also stabilizing the watershed, the floodplain area, and building the aquifer, actually.
Or you can make arguments that you can handle this all not by any behavioral change, but instead by a bigger, by hardware of one kind or another. That it's not a composting toilet, but it's a bigger waste treatment plant. Or it's importing water from someplace else, which I gather Nogales continues to think about doing.
There's no place they can import it from.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the cap water's never coming down here.
No.
And there's no other source. Nogales, Sonora has another source in the Alamos Basin to the west, to southwest of them, but we don't.
Right. Well, of course, if it comes to this treatment plant, then if they get more water in some sense, ultimately, I suppose you will too.
Except now they're building a plant at Los Alisos. I'm sorry, not Los Alamos. It's called Los Alisos Basin. And it's been talked about for years and years.
Yeah, it has, since I was...
But yes, they are. That last I heard, they were building it. And the idea is to take the flow that would be additional to what we're getting now in our treatment plant, and instead send it back to that basin, which is much better for them. And I'm glad they're doing it. And we're still going to get what we get. Yeah. So, you remember that they were talking about that way back then.
Yes, I do. I do remember Los Alisos all those ways, long time ago. All right. Well, I may not be able to pull up, and we're at 56 minutes, so that ain't bad.
Well, if you think of it, email me.
I will. Thank you. This is.
There's they call themselves an intentional community that moved down 3 years ago now from Sedona, and they were called Avalon Gardens up there. Now they're called the Global Community Communications Alliance. Big mouthful. Anyway, it's like 100 and some odd people, 25 people maybe. It took them a couple of years to move down here altogether because they were selling off land up there and all. So they're kind of a fringe group in that don't get into their religion because, oh my God. But practically speaking, they're into organic gardening and sustainable building and really very environmentally conscious. And LeMay Bremer, who's one of their members, is on our board also, and has been for 3 or 4 years now, since they came down, I guess, maybe so whenever 3 years. And now they're riparian landowners too. So they are the eastern neighbors to Tumacacori, to their, the national park. So they're a new dimension. They're their own little community, and they also do a lot. They're talk about networking. I mean, they're just everywhere. They've got a hospice and a medical clinic and a legal service and a roofing company and everything. So, Blue Evening Star, who's one of their members too, she was our volunteer committee person for a while, and will be again, I hope. She was really interested in those bio-regional, that whole movement, and she teaches kids in the community. They're all homeschooled, and so she has this very ambitious class of bioregionalism. So it's really kind of cool that she uses the river, and the kids have come with us on River Watch, and they've tromped through the river, and they've done all kinds of cleanups and events where they'll have a booth of recycling and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
So that's another dimension that is quirky. In a way, it's very suited to Tubac, even though they're in Tumacacori, not Tubac.
was talking about the
And it's another community dimension, and another network.
the Tea Party.
Who you might, other than the river, might have nothing in common with much.
Well, except they have a CSA.
Yeah.
You know, but yes, you're right. Absolutely, I know a lot of them now that I never would have known except for this group,
Right.
and it's been really enlightening in a lot of ways, and they're very helpful. Very.
Yeah. And in a way, the influence of a non-human thing, this river has tied a lot of people together.
Absolutely.
A lot of people and agencies and interests. It's part of the network, and it is the sort of overlapping thing over many networks.
Yeah, it is, and it binds people. It does.
Yeah.
So that was.
That's perfect. Thank you.